This Choircast podcast is brought to you by the book Sitting in the Shade of Another Tree. For too long, people of faith have focused more on pointing out where other religions get it wrong. But what if we decided to focus more on all the ways those other religions get it right? This path might end up leading us into deeper understanding, connection, friendship, and peace. Sitting in the Shade of Another Tree, from Choir Publishing and Pathos, available now on Amazon.
Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? All right, we're here for our first book club episode where we take an ancient spiritual text, try to understand the culture, and discern what the truth is that lies underneath the culture. And we're starting at the beginning with Genesis chapter 1, the very first words in the Bible. Genesis chapter 1 is actually not about science. Genesis chapter 1 is about a lot of really important things. Science just isn't one of them. And we're going to talk about all of the different layers of meaning that exist in that chapter. We're going to use the deepest things that we can find from the academic community, and we're going to figure out what kinds of meanings we can unearth from Genesis chapter 1. And I'm going to be honest, Genesis chapter 1 is not going to help you understand where the dinosaurs are or how humans came to be. It's not going to talk to you about evolution or any of those things, primarily because those things are modern scientific ideas. So let's just start right in with Genesis chapter 1, because it starts with the name of the book. So the name of the book in Hebrew is not Genesis. The name of the book in Hebrew is Bereshit or Bereshit. And that word is actually the first word of the book of Genesis. And that word is beginning, or really more literally, it's the beginning. And so to put it into English, to make it make more sense, it is in the beginning. And so a lot of translations of the Bible will actually begin like that. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the New Revised Standard Updated Edition, which is what scholars use, it begins with, when God began to create the heavens and the earth. And it says, the earth was complete chaos and darkness covered over the face of the deep. Now, it starts with that word beginning, because that is what the book of Genesis is about. The book of Genesis is about beginnings. It's about beginnings in a really important and specific way, right? It's not just about general beginnings, but it's about tracing the beginnings of everything, the beginnings of why we are the way we are, the beginnings of where do bad things come from in the world, the beginnings of who God is, the beginnings of the identity of humanity, the beginnings of the purpose of humanity. All of that finds its source in the book of Genesis. Genesis is to tell us the sort of starting point. If you're trying to sort of make a trend line, you have to have a starting point, and then you sort of can track all kinds of different things. And that's what the book of Genesis is. It is the book of beginnings. And that first word is actually beginning, the first word of the book of Genesis. And it's the name of the book in Hebrew. So that's important. So because when we approach this book, we don't need to approach it looking for things that it is not trying to give us. And it's not trying to tell us as many things as a lot of people want to find in it. It's not trying to tell us science. It's not trying to tell us any of those things. It's trying to tell us beginning, the way it all started. And not from a scientific perspective, not from a literal perspective, but just trace back the source of all of the things that we have to deal with as humans. And it is written to an ancient culture. That's an important piece to understand because, we often will sort of program our own ideas into the Bible. We will read our own scientific understanding into the Bible in a way that's really not helpful, right? We know a whole lot about everything, and we will assume that when we enter into the biblical text. For example, we know that water on the earth evaporates. It goes up into the air. It rises up. It creates clouds. It cools. And then when it creates some kinds of clouds, that creates more condensation that eventually gets heavy enough to fall back to the earth and is rain. That might feel like a really simple thing, something that everybody should know. And it is. It's something that is sort of just elementary school science. But the ancient world, they didn't know that. They didn't have that answer. They didn't know that the earth was round. They were authentic flat earthers at the time that the book of Genesis was created. So the book of Genesis has a worldview, an understanding of how the world exists that is very different from our own. And that's important because if you look at what they understood, you can find a lot of diagrams online. But basically, you sort of started with a flat earth, right? Underneath the earth was waters. And the water was chaos. The water was called, in some places, Sheol, or the deep. And it was the sort of unpredictable part of their world. If you can imagine living in the ancient world before kiln-fired bricks, right? A long time ago, if there was a flood, for example, you might flee the flood, you might run up to the mountains, and when the flood receded, you would go back to where you lived. But without kiln-fired bricks, those bricks that you created, they just turned back into mud. So when you went back after a flood, it wasn't like after a hurricane in the United States of America. It wasn't after a tsunami in different parts of the world. It was like someone had pressed reset on the landscape. It was just mud. Like mud was all that was left. So you can imagine in the ancient world how powerful and scary waters, specifically flood waters, were. And so that is the sort of symbol of chaos, of uncontrolled power that exists below the earth. So you've got the flat earth. Below it is the waters, Sheol, the deep. And the idea is that when those waters break forth, floods happen, disasters happen. And disasters happen on a scale that you and I have a hard time even fathoming, where everything is just reset to zero. And that is, it's really horrifying. So what happens in that sort of a setup, or their understanding of the world and the way it existed, you had the earth, and it was on top of the waters, and the waters are chaos. And that's why in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, it says, the earth, this is verse 2, was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep. Remember, we've talked about what the deep is. That's the part that's under the flat earth. And while a wind from God swept over the waters. Another way of doing that, that word wind is ruach, and it can also be used to mean the word spirit. And so in other translations, it'll say, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters, hovered over the deep. So the wind of God, or the Spirit of God, hovered over chaos, right? And was sort of like, it feels like it's like tamping down. It's keeping chaos at bay. And then it says, and then God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There was evening, and there was morning, the first day. This is really important because this idea of God creating light and darkness out of nothing, out of chaos, is a bigger idea. It's the idea that God can create order out of chaos. And this is a theme that you find throughout the scriptures, throughout traditions of Christianity and of Judaism, that when things are bad, when things are horrifying, when things get out of control, when things seem to be in a state of chaos, there are stories of God creating order out of that chaos. And those go back to this moment at the very beginning, that God creates order out of chaos right here in the first couple of chapters of Genesis, the book that is called Beginnings. So it says, God called the light day and the darkness night, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. So that's important. We have the first day, evening and morning the first day, and so we begin this cycle. It's going to have 7 days in this cycle. And this is the very beginning of what creation scientists begin to say, that the earth was created in 7 days. Creation science is a misnomer because it is in no way science, and it's really actually pretty bad theology as well. So what's going on here is a beginning of a pattern, of a repetition. I like to think of this as sort of a beat to the song that is being sung here, because this first chapter of Genesis is actually much closer to a philosophical poem, something like the Iliad and the Odyssey, than just a random allegorical tale about how God created the heavens and the earth. This is something that is deep and profound. This is something that represents some of the most advanced thinking in the ancient world. In fact, a lot of scholars will tell you that this is like one of the most sort of philosophically advanced things for this time, the time in which it was written. All kinds of interesting facts about it. The first sentence is 7 words long. There's sort of this like layer of sevens, like the middle word in the chapter is 7 letters long. It's a brilliant philosophical poem that is meant to help us imagine ourselves into the story of God and to find our own source right here. All right, so that's the first day. Then it says, and God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters. Let it separate the waters from the waters. So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky. There was evening and there was morning the second day. In other translations, there is a sort of technical term for this dome called the firmament. And again, remember, we're talking about an ancient culture, and this ancient culture believed very specific things about the earth, how it was formed, how it was created. And so they believed that the earth was flat. They believed that under the earth under that flat earth was water, the chaos, the deep. And above that was a clear dome called the firmament. And the firmament was really important because on top of the firmament was water. That's why the sky was blue. And in the firmament, there were little windows that could be opened and closed by God. And when the windows were open, guess what happened? Rain. Right, exactly. And when the windows were closed, it didn't rain. Now, you and I both know that's not the way it works. We understand about condensation. We understand about rainfall. We understand about weather patterns. But in the ancient world, thousands of years ago, they didn't know all of that stuff. So for them, it made sense to say that the sky had a clear dome. There was water up there. That's how the water came in, was through some windows that would be opened and closed, right? And this, amongst a lot of other things, is why it's really a bad idea to talk about the first chapter of Genesis in terms of science. It is not a science textbook. And to try to get modern science out of the book of Genesis, it is a fool's errand because the people just didn't know what we know. They literally thought there was a clear dome in the sky that held water back so that rain happened. And if somebody told you that today, you would just probably laugh. You would definitely think that there was something wrong with them, that maybe they lived in some remote part of the world that didn't understand basic science that you learned in elementary school. I don't know, but we know that's not the way it works. We also know that the earth isn't flat and the earth isn't sitting on water. We know all of these things, right? And that's why we don't try to take the first chapter of Genesis as any sort of scientific account. It's just not. It's bad science. But it's actually not science at all, right? The first chapter of Genesis is philosophy, is theology. It's trying to tell us about the beginnings of everything, including us. And it's not intended for us to read, in fact. The people who wrote Genesis were not imagining people in the year 2024 or whatever year it is that you are listening to this podcast or watching this video or whatever. They weren't thinking about TikTok and a live stream of this when they wrote this. They were talking to people that were right there, were right around them, that knew the earth was flat and knew there was a clear dome. And so to try to take that and say that there's somehow modern science to be had here, it's just, well, it's a distraction. It's a distraction from the real point of what's going on here in the book of Genesis. So let's keep going. That was the first day, or we're in the second day, where God creates a dome, and God's called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. So that's the second day. God creates the clear dome that separates the waters above from the waters below. And we know that none of that is scientifically accurate, but it is important. And it's going to seem even more important in just a minute. But then it says in verse 9, it says, "And God let the waters under the sky be gathered together in one place and let dry ground appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered he called seas. And God saw that it was good." And here we have the first mention of that. There is, like I said, the day pattern of and then there was evening and there was morning the first day. There was evening and there was morning the second day. That's sort of the downbeat of this song in the book of Genesis. Then there's another beat. There's a harmony or maybe a melody that's playing. And that comes in right here in verse 10 for the very first time, that God looks at something and God saw that it was good. And we're going to keep coming back to that because that has some really important implications for us as people, really important implications for the whole story that we tell ourselves and about the world. All right, so then it says, "Then God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed and trees of every kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding all this stuff. And God saw that it was good." There it is again. And then the beat continues. "And there was evening and there was morning the third day." All right. Third day, God creates the sea. God creates the plants. And God says twice that it is good. And that's the end of day 3. And then it says in verse 14, "And let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons for the days and the years. Let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser night to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And we have a problem here. We have a real problem here, because I don't know if you remember, day one. Day one is light and dark. And then day 4 is the sun and the moon. I mean, we know like that's not how it works. Right? You don't have day and night without the sun and the moon. Right? This is the point at which, if you haven't figured it out at this point, those people who are more skeptical, like me, read this and are like, that's not a thing. You don't have day and night without the sun and the moon. This is not reliable. Let's keep going with it, because I promise there's something more here to this. And then it says, God let, on the next day, God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle, creeping things. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and also the creatures on the ground of every kind. And then it says, and God saw that it was good. Yeah. So we got the 5th day. That's the 6th day. God creates all the animals. And now, if we wanted to chart this out, we could do something really interesting. And if we were in person, we had a whiteboard or something together, I'd show you on a whiteboard. Day 1, God creates day and the night. Day 2, God creates the waters above from the waters below. God creates the sky and the sea. Day 3, God creates the land. And that's interesting because each of those are sort of domains in which something lives. And what we see actually is that there's a parallelism. 1, 2, and 3. 1 is day and night. Day 4, 5, and 6 are parallel. Day 4, God creates the sun and the moon. Day 2, God creates the sky and the sea. Day 5, God creates the fish and the birds of the air. Day 3, God creates the land, and day 6, God creates the animals. And that's not unintentional. This is someone who was incredibly intelligent, that was composing this philosophical poem. And what happens is this is sort of pointing to a structure. The structure, this is sort of one take on this, is the idea that there are rulers and there are realms, and it's sort of building up. And the realms, sort of light and dark, are ruled by the sun and the moon. The sky is ruled by the birds. The land is ruled by the animals. And then the next thing that God does, it says, let us create humans in our own image and our own likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish and the sea, over the birds of the air and the cattle, over the wild animals and the wild horses. Everything creeps upon the earth. So God created humans in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And that is a huge deal. If you follow this whole concept, this theological framework for this, you've got the rulers and the realms, and then you have this like pause and something that has said humanity to rule, but to take care of, I think, is maybe a better way of thinking about it. To take care of everything, all of it. And so all of this is really important because theologically, it is trash science. Don't trust it as science. It's not talking about the universe. It's not talking about orbits. It's not talking about the way the sun, the earth orbits. It's not talking about any of that because they didn't understand it. The people at this time had no concept of any of that. And so, of course, the writers of that time can't put that information in there. And more importantly, that's not the story they're trying to tell. They're trying to convey deeper truth. Right? They're trying to convey truth about existence and reality and morality, truth about the intrinsic worth of people, and truth about our role, our purpose on the planet. And here is where we get some of that purpose. rulers and realms, right? The sun and the moon govern the day and the night, the fish in the ocean, the birds in the sky, and the animals in the land. And then it says he creates people in our likeness and let them have dominion over the fish and the sea and the birds and the air, all of it, which says that humanity's purpose, one of the deepest purposes that we have, one of the original purposes that we have, is to care for the earth, for the environment, for the land, for the sea, for the sky, for the animals, for the trees. And it's why, for many people, when you show them a video of like a deforestation machine just plowing through the Amazon, it makes them sad. When you show somebody a video of like the industrialized food system with little baby chicks on a conveyor belt just being dropped from conveyor belt to conveyor belt, I get sad. In this like deep place. We get sad about that. We are affected by that because we are connected in the deepest possible way to this planet and to these animals. And it is our purpose as these sort of apex predators, if you want to talk in a non-theological way. Like, it is our responsibility to care for all of that. And this first chapter in the book of Genesis makes this abundantly clear. Environmentalism is not a political issue. It is a theological issue. It is a moral issue. It is an issue at the heart of what it means to be human. To care for the environment is to fulfill one of your deepest, most original purposes. And I just can't overstate that enough. But I do believe that there's something even deeper here. I think there's two things that are even deeper here. And it comes here from chapter 1, verse 27, where it says, God created humans in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And I think that he is a bad pronoun for God. I think that they, them is probably a better pronoun for God. But I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. So that's why I'm using the pronoun he here. But God created humans in his image. And this is a profound theological concept. This is the idea that at the center of who you are is the image of God, that in each human, there is a part of who God is that is sort of at the center of our identity. And in this sort of understanding of God that is being put forth in this chapter, it is the God that is the creator and the caretaker. It is this image of a loving God that is brilliant and creating and providing and all of those things, all the things that you wish that a parent would be, a parent that is creating and guarding and giving safety and providing all of those things. That's the God that we see here. And it says that when humanity is created in the image of that God, that we bear. Another way that theologians will put it is that humanity is the image bearers of God in the world. That when we walk out into the world, we bear God's image. Now, some of us cover over that image with all kinds of stuff, all kinds of bad things, and we do our best not to reflect the image of God. That's the reality of life sometimes. But one rabbi said that the entirety of the human existence and of the human experience is merely uncovering the image of God that is already within us. I love that way of talking about the image of God because it tells us that even though we do horrible things, even though we ruin all kinds of things, even though we do evil, evil is not at the heart of who we are. We are not intrinsically bad people. bad beings, evil beings. We are intrinsically good beings that, unfortunately, repeatedly choose to do bad things. And that's, I think, one of the deepest pieces here. And it's sort of underscored by the end of this passage. In chapter 1, verse 31, it says that God looked over everything that he had made, and indeed it was, and this is the last beat of that, or the last piece of that harmony, and indeed it was very good. So we have, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was very good. And this is the idea that when God creates things as good. And that's really, 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 really important, because when we talk about self-esteem, when we talk about our own identity, we can get lulled into this thinking that we are just intrinsically bad. And that's not healthy. It's not helpful. And ultimately, it's just not accurate in this theological sense. If you look at the book of Genesis, if you look at the first chapter, one of the most important and repeated themes is that you are good. I am good. At the center of who you are good. Do you do bad things? Yes. Do I do bad things? Absolutely. But at the center of who you are is good. And so it's not that we are bad people trying to become good. It is that we are good people who are drawn into badness. And when we come back to ourselves, when we come back to who we are truly are, we're good. The center, our starting point, our ending point is goodness, not evil. And that is absolutely important. Now, we are talking about a culture that is very old, a culture that is steeped in patriarchy. We are talking about a culture that is just so deeply entrenched in all kinds of things that we have moved past since, that it is really important when we read it to not get distracted by those things, right? Is it patriarchal? Yes. Is it misogynistic? 100%. Does it use male pronouns for God, who is definitely not a male? Absolutely it does. But there is deeper truth available to us here if we can look past the ancient culture that is sort of laid on top of this and dig deeper into what is there. So we have this idea that at the center of us, of who we are, is goodness. We have all of that. And then this idea that really all of life is uncovering the goodness within you. So the question is, how do you do that? If at the center of who you are is really good, because it's the image of God. If the image of God is the part of you that's hidden in the deepest part of who you are, how do we uncover that goodness? I've got a couple of things. First part is we reject the bad as being not our true selves. This can be hard. This can be especially hard for those of us who have believed the lie that we are evil at our core, that we are bad at our core, who have believed the lie that somebody else gave us, the identity that somebody else gave us, that we are bad people. But the beginning of this is to begin to train yourself to reject the bad inside, the bad thoughts, the bad choices, whatever, and say, that's not who I am. I made a horrible choice. I did a horrible thing. I broke something bad. I said a lie. Whatever it is, I did that. I am not that. And I think for me, one of the easiest ways to begin this is to think of it as labels that we have put on ourselves, or labels that we have given, names that we have been given. And sometimes there's a lot of trauma here, right? Sometimes these names don't just go back to our own head. They go back to a teacher, a pastor, a family member who called us something awful, who called us lazy or a liar or a pervert or whatever it was. There was a name that was given to you. And it was said to you in such a way, or said to you enough, that you accepted it as part of your identity, as a description of who you are at a deepest level. And when you do that, when you take those names and you plant them deep within you, they start to fester. They start to cause all kinds of problems, and you start to believe it. And so I find that for me, one of the most helpful things is to just take a moment to get a journal or a piece of paper or something and just start writing the names that you've been given over the years, the negative names that you've been given over the years, just out on the piece of paper. It can be hard. You might have to take a break. You might not be able to do them all in one sitting, but to write those names down and then to let go of them. There's a couple of ways that you can do that. One of the ways that you can do that, after you write down these negative names that you've been given, you can go next to them. You can cross out the name and you can write whatever the opposite is, whatever the positive version of that is. You can say, like, I was told I was a liar. You can exit out and you say, I am a truth teller, right? Somebody can say that you were a bitch. And it turns out you cross that out and you were a kind person, whatever it is. That's one of the ways that you can do that. And you can replace the old names with new names. Another thing that I like, because I like rituals, and I think that rituals can help recenter us and reorient the world around us. I actually like to take all of those names and to roll that piece of paper up. And if you've got a candle, to light a candle, but if you don't, just to take a lighter and a metal pot and to just light it on fire and drop it in the pot and watch it burn away. Watch all the names, all of the labels you've been given burn away. And just as it's burning, imagine that they are burning away from your identity, that they are burning out of your subconscious and you're releasing them. Does that work? Is it magic? Do you wake up the next day and never think of yourself like that again? Absolutely not. They come back. When they come back, you can write them down. You can cross them out. You can take a candle. You can take a match. Take a metal bowl. And you can watch them burn again. And again. And again. And each time, it gets easier to let go of them and to claim something new for yourself. And what you're claiming for yourself is what this first chapter of Genesis is talking about. You're claiming for yourself that the deepest part of you, the truest part of you, your real identity is the image of God. That who you are is good. It was probably 15 years ago that I was teaching about this. There were about 500 people in the room, and one of them was a teenager who was queer and had not yet come out to anybody but himself. And he heard this talk about the names that we've been given and the names that he had taken on himself. And he wrote a bunch of those down and he let them go. And then he got his cousin and went on a walk and came out to his cousin, who was incredibly supportive of him, because he realized that who he was good, that God created him good, and that if God created him good, that he could claim that identity. He could claim that identity as good. And I think that is a really important thing for us to remember. It's really important for us to find our identity in God. And when we discover who we are in our deepest parts, we can know that that comes from the image of God. The image of God is a good thing. And as we do that, as we let go of the negative names that we have, as we let go of all of the things that all the labels that people have given us, we are becoming our true selves, the people that God created. But we've only made it to the 6th day so far, because the first chapter of Genesis ends with the 6th day, but there's one more day. It says, starting in Genesis chapter 2, it says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. On the 6th day, God finished the work that he had done. He rested on the 7th day from all the work he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation." Now, this idea of resting on the 7th day, it tells us something about how the people thought of God. Because in this part of the world, everybody works 7 days a week in order to survive. Well, not everybody. Almost everybody did. The people who didn't work 7 days a week were the kings, were the rulers, were the people who were in charge of everything. And so part of this last day is the people who are writing it giving sort of hat tip, a head nod to the fact that God was the ruler of everything, that God was the king of the earth, as it were. This idea of the resting day, that's eventually called the Sabbath day, it's not something that God just keeps for God's self. It's something that God gives to humanity, to God's people. And God commands God's people to stop working on the 7th day. And that is equally powerful. It's equally powerful because in the way in which it pushes against our systemic injustice, the way it pushes against the valuing of humans, the way it pushes against a capitalistic system. Because working on a 7th day, instead of not working on a 7th day, instead of working 7 days a week, defines your identity different. If you work 7 days a week, it's easy to value you as a tool, the same way you value a shovel or a hammer, as to how much work you can get done. If you value yourself that way, you will work 7 days a week. You will work all the hours that you can work, and it will be all about that. It'll be all about how much you can produce. You will be valued in the same way a tool is valued. Except that the Sabbath day pushes back against that. It says that you are not a tool. You are not a machine, and you are not to be valued in that way. Instead, you are to be valued because you are an image bearer of God. Because you are something bigger, something better, more holy at the core of yourself. Not at the surface, you mess that up all the time. But you aren't just a tool, you aren't just a cog in the capitalist machine. You have value intrinsically within yourself, regardless of what you can produce, regardless of what you accomplish in this life. You have value just as you are. That's what the Sabbath day teaches. And that's what God sets as an example here. All right. That's the first story of the book of Genesis. Our Skeptic Pastor community asked for a book club where we read a passage of the Bible and I teach a little bit, and then we discuss it in our Discord channel. And that's what's going to happen with this. It's something that we call Not Church. Not Church is a place where other people like us come together and are there for each other. It's full of people with all kinds of different spiritual labels who are exploring spirituality together, exploring ancient texts together, exploring what it means to unravel all of this sort of homophobic stuff from spiritual texts and from religion. It's full of people who are processing their own stories and religious pain together. One person said, it's like all the things that you want from a church without people telling you that you're going to hell for not believing the right things. So if that's something you like, if you'd like to be part of that kind of community, you can join our Patreon to get access. You can find that at patreon.com/skepticpastor. Patreon.com/skepticpastor. You can pay just a couple bucks a month, and it gets you into the Discord where we do all of that and hold space for each other and post some really funny memes every once in a while. That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.